This leaflet is coming through your letterbox one day soon. Or maybe you've already had your copy. Read it carefully. It tells you what the new National Health Service is.
For decades, millions of British people had suffered illnesses that went untreated, because going to the dentist, the optician, even the ordinary doctor, cost money that few could afford. Doctors did work in the slums, but very few. London's East End had just one GP for every 18,000 people. In the leafy suburbs, it was one for every 250. "It is not to every doctor's taste," said one GP, "to work 20 hours a day in the slums to earn as much as he could earn in 3 hours in a more congenial locale." For the majority of the population, healthcare was a matter of charity. Fundraising parades were a regular sight on Britain's streets, drumming up cash for the great voluntary hospitals that provided desperately needed care for the poor. The hospitals survived primarily on handouts from rich benefactors, but philanthropy alone could never provide all that was needed. Without a radical change, good healthcare would only ever be for the privileged few. In January 1948, Aneurin Bevan, the Labour Minister for Health, made one of the most audacious political promises in British history. In just 6 months' time, on July the 5th, free healthcare would be available to every British citizen. "My heart is full of bitterness," he once said, "for when I see the well-nourished bodies of the wealthy, I also see the ill and haggard faces of my own people." And Nye Bevan, above all, claimed this was the moment to create a new society. "We have been the dreamers. We have been the sufferers," he said. "Now we are the builders."
There is a school of thought, you know, that believes that if a thing is scarce, it ought to be dear, although it doesn't cost any more to produce it than if it were plentiful. Now, that's all right from the point of view of orthodox economics. But this isn't an orthodox government, and I'm not an orthodox Minister of Health.
On January the 3rd, 1948, Bevan made his pledge to the nation. Free healthcare would soon be theirs, financed by taxes based on the ability to pay. The National Health Service was the country's biggest and most expensive social reform ever conceived. Creating it from scratch in mere months would be a race against time, because from the outset it faced bitter opposition. These sweeping social reforms were attacked by the Tories, and Churchill vehemently opposed Bevan's revolutionary ideas from the start. Winston Churchill's Tory party had fought Bevan's bill at every stage in the House of Commons. Britain was bankrupt after the most expensive war in history. How could we possibly afford it? The British papers were predicting disaster. The public would exploit a free-for-all. But the angriest and most passionate opponents of the National Health Service were the very people needed to make it work. The dentists, the surgeons, and most of all, the doctors. The BMA had even gone so far as to compare Bevan to Hitler, a comparison Bevan's arch-rival Churchill would have approved of, having previously equated socialism with dictatorship.
No socialist government could afford to allow free, sharp or violently worded expressions of public discontent. They would have to fall back on some form of Gestapo.
Bevan believed the doctors' resistance would crack if they faced a groundswell of public demand. His trump card was the unique selling point of the NHS. Everything would cost nothing. Bevan also knew the strongest argument for the health service was that it would dramatically improve the lives of Britain's children. With child mortality still a grave concern, up to 10,000 a year dying from diphtheria alone, this was a compelling reason for signing up.
So that we've never voted on the privatisation of the health service. It's just happened in subterfuge. It's happened by demonising people who work in the health service, like the junior doctors who are presented as not wanting to give up their weekends. I mean, what a lie that is. The nurses and ancillary workers have no pay rises, and if they want even to keep up their standard of living, they're painted as greedy.
This is a job that I love. I wouldn't want to do another job. But when you are coming home every day, exhausted, emotionally, physically, financially, increasingly, you start to weigh up whether or not it's worth it.
In a survey of junior doctors by the Royal College of Physicians, 70% worked from a rota that was permanently understaffed. 80% felt their work put them under excessive stress, and a quarter felt it had a serious impact on their mental health.
It is standard as part of privatisation for government to deliberately run down the public service for several years before the privatisation finalises, in order that the public will feel that there is a step up as the private sector comes in.
The average funding increase over the years for the NHS up to 1997 was about around 3% a year. Now, under the Labour government, it averaged 6% a year. Under the Tory Lib Dem coalition, it went down to 1% a year.
There was copious funding put in place to ease the reorganisations into place. But now that we're in the final stages of privatisation, money is very tight indeed, because that makes the service look worse, and it will make the public want to give up on the NHS and switch to American-style healthcare.
The British National Health Service, a central pillar of the post-war welfare state, was a revolutionary social advance. In the last 30 years, a secret and incremental plan of destruction of the nation's proudest achievement has unfolded. A monumental betrayal of the public interest. The American healthcare system is made up of insurance companies, hospital provider chains, drug and medical appliance companies, and the government. The profit motive is the driving force, and for insurers, money can be made by the denial of care and high out-of-pocket expenses before insurance claims can be made. Hospital providers inflate charges and carry out unnecessary tests and treatments, then bill the patients, insurers, or the government. Drug and appliance manufacturers push up their prices, heavily market and exaggerate the benefits of their products. Some of those excluded by privatized healthcare are supported by government funding. Medicare for the elderly and Medicaid for the poor and the young. But government funding mostly goes to private providers and insurers. Despite being the world's richest country with the most expensive healthcare, America has the highest number of maternal deaths of any developed country. Figures from 2015 show for every 100,000 live births, more than 26 American mothers will die, almost 3 times higher than in Britain. Former United Health Group CEO Dr. Bill McGuire received an outgoing compensation package worth in excess of $1 billion. Medical bills are the cause of 60% of household bankruptcy in America, and more than 3/4 of these bankrupt families had medical insurance. Over 200 parliamentarians were able to vote through the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition government's 2012 Health and Social Care Act, despite the fact they had financial links to private healthcare companies.
There's no privatisation of the NHS on my watch, and the integrated care contracts will go to public sector bodies to deliver the NHS in public hands.
Look, I think everything with the trade deal is on the table. When you're dealing in trade, everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that, but everything will be on the table, absolutely.
It's a tragedy, but it's a tragedy of our own making if we don't change it. Nye Bevan said, National Health Service will exist as long as there are people to fight for it. The question is, do we have the stomach to fight for it?